The icy blast of the snow-laden wind penetrated through his thin coat. His hands were shaking with the cold. A sign caught Woodford's eye, the illuminated beacon of a relief lodging house. At once he made his way toward it. He could at least sleep there tonight, get started from the city in the morning. The shabby men dozing inside in chairs looked queerly at him as he entered. So did the young clerk to whom he made his way. I'd like to stay here tonight," he said to the clerk. The clerk stared. "Are you trying to kid me?" Woodford shook his head. "No, I'm penniless and it's cold outside. I've got to stay somewhere." The clerk smiled disdainfully. "Listen, fellow, no one with duds like yours is that hard up. Scram before I call a cop." Woodford looked down at his clothes, his frock coat and stiff white shirt and gleaming patent leather shoes, and understood. He said desperately to the clerk, "But please, clothes don't make anything. I tell you, I haven't a penny." "Will you beat it before I have you thrown out of here?" the clerk demanded. Woodford backed toward the door. He went outside again into the cold. The wind had increased and more snow was falling. The front of Woodford's coat was soon covered with it as he pushed along. It came to him as a queer joke that the splendor of his funeral clothes should keep him from getting help now. He couldn't even beg a passerby for a dime. Who would give to a panhandler in formal clothes? Woodford felt his body quivering and his teeth chattering from the sheer cold. If he could only get out of the blast of the icy wind. His eyes sought desperately along the street for a hallway where he might shelter himself. He found a deep doorway and crouched down inside it, out of the wind and driving snow. But hardly had he done so when a heavy step paused in front of him and a nightstick rapped his feet smartly. An authoritative voice ordered him to get up and go home. Woodford did not try to explain to the policeman that he was not a drunken citizen fallen by the way. He got wearily to his feet and moved on along the street, unable to see more than a few feet ahead for the whirl of snow. The snow on which he was walking penetrated the thin shoes he wore, and his feet were soon even colder than the rest of his body. He walked with slow, dragging steps, head bent against the storm of white. He was dully aware that the dark shops beside him had given way to a low stone wall. With a sudden start, he recognized it as the wall of the cemetery which he had left but hours before, the cemetery containing the vault which he had escaped. The vault! Why hadn't I thought of it before, he asked himself. The vault would be a shelter from the freezing wind and snow. He could stay there for the night without anyone objecting. He paused, feeling for a moment a little renewal of his former terrors. Did he dare go back into that place which he had struggled to escape? Then an extra strong blast of icy air struck him and decided him. The vault would be shelter, and that was what his frozen body craved more than anything else. He stiffly climbed over the low stone wall and made his way through the cemetery's whitened monuments and vaults towards the one from which he had escaped. The driving snow covered his tracks almost as he made them, as he trudged toward the vault. He reached it and tried its iron doors anxiously. Suppose he had locked them when he left, but to his relief they swung open, and he entered and shut them. It was dark inside, but he was out of the wind and snow, and now his numbed body felt a little relief. Woodford sat down on the corner of the vault. It was a shelter for the night, at least. It seemed rather ironic that he had to come back here for shelter, but it was something to be thankful for that he had even this. In the morning, when the storm was over, he could leave without anyone seeing and get out of the city. He sat listening to the wind and snow shriek outside. The stone floor of the vault was very cold, so cold that he felt his limbs stiffening and cramping, and finally he stood up unsteadily and paced to the fro of the vault, chafing his arms and hands. If he had only a blanket, or even a heavy coat to lie upon, he'd freeze there upon the stone floor. Then, as he turned in his pacing, he bumped into the coffin on the shelf, and a new idea was born in his mind. The coffin! Why, the interior of it was lined deep with silk and satin padding. It would be warm in the coffin. He could sleep in it far better than on the cold stone floor. But did he dare re-enter it? Again, Woodford felt faintly the former terrors he had experienced when he had awakened in it. But they meant nothing, he told himself. He would not be fastened in it this time, and his frozen flesh yearned for the warmth of the coffin's lining. Slowly, carefully, he climbed up and lowered himself into the coffin and stretched out. The silken padding he sank into had a grateful warmth. He lowered his head upon the softened little pillow with a sigh of relief. This was better. He experienced an almost luxurious comfort now. But after he had lain for a little while, he felt that the top of his body was still cold, where the cold air came into the open coffin top. That cold air entering kept him from being completely warm, if the lid above him were just closed to keep out the cold air. He reached up and got the edge of the heavy metal lid, and then let it down upon himself. He was completely in the dark now, inside the closed coffin. But he was warm, too, for the lid kept out the cold air, and he was getting warmer all the time as his body warmed up the interior. Yes, it was far more comfortable with the lid closed. An even warmth now pervaded over his being, and the air inside the coffin was still getting warmer and thicker. He felt a little drowsy now as he breathed that warm air, felt luxuriously sleepy as he lay on the soft silk. It was getting a little harder to breathe somehow as the air became thicker. He ought really to raise the coffin lid and let in some fresh air, but it was so warm now, and the air outside was so cold, and he was more and more sleepy. Something dim and receding in his fading consciousness told him that he was on the way to suffocation. But what if he was his sleepy thought. He was better off in here than back in the world outside. He had been a fool ever to fight so hard before to get out of his warm, comfortable coffin, to get back to that outside world. No, it was better like this, the darkness and the warmth and the sleep that advanced. Nobody would ever know that he had awakened at all, that he had been away from here at all. Everything would be just as before. Just as before. And with that comforting assurance, John Woodford was swept farther and farther down the dark stream of unconsciousness, from which this time there would be no returning. The red wristband. A doctor was working at a hospital where patients were tagged with colored bands: green alive, red deceased. One night a doctor was instructed to get a few supplies from the basement of the hospital, and so he headed to the lift. The lift doors opened and there was a patient inside, minding her own business. Patients were allowed to roam around the hospital to stretch, especially those who have stayed long. The rule was to be back in their rooms before 10. The doctor smiled at the patient before pressing the number for the basement. He found it unusual that the woman didn't have a button pressed already. He wondered if she was heading to the basement too. The lift finally reached the floor where the doors opened. In the distance, a man was limping towards the elevator, and in a panic, the doctor slammed the elevator button to close. It finally did, and the lift began to ascend back up, the doctor's heart pounding. "Why did you do that?" "He was trying to use the lift," the woman stated, annoyed. "Did you see his wrist?" the doctor asked. "It was red. He died last night. I would know because I did his surgery." The woman lifted her wrist. He saw red. She smiled. "Like this one?" Who's in my bed? A father went to say goodnight to his 7-year-old son, very well knowing that if he didn't, his son would have trouble sleeping. It was a nightly routine between them. He entered the dimly lit room where his son waited under his blanket. With the first glance, the father could tell there was something unusual about his son tonight, but couldn't put his finger on it. He looked the same, but had a grin that drew from ear to ear. "You okay, buddy?" the father asked. The son nodded, still with the grin, before saying, "Daddy, check for monsters under the bed." The father chuckled a bit before getting on his knees to check, only to satisfy his son. There, under the bed, pale and afraid, was his son. His real son. He whispered, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." A mother's call. A daughter was in her room upstairs doing her homework when suddenly she heard her mother call to come down for dinner. She jumped onto her feet and began making her way towards the stairs, but before even taking a step, hands grabbed her and pulled her into the laundry room beside the staircase. She panicked before realizing it was her mother, her real mother, eyes watery and bloodshot. "Don't go down there, honey. I heard it too."